Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. Wherever you find guns, that's what we're going to talk about. So please take a moment, like and share the program, and encourage your friends to do the same. Also want to let you know, for those of you who have not subscribed or are looking to subscribe, when you do so, make sure you hit that notification button on both Facebook and YouTube so that you can get the notification as soon as we go live and you can participate in the live chat as the program is taking place. Also want to remind you, Firearms Policy Coalition is a membership organization. We want to encourage you to join today. Folks, here's the thing. We're doing whatever we can, whether it's in the courts, whether it's in the halls of government, whether it is in the media. We are doing whatever we can to help fight for your fundamental right to keep and bear arms. But folks, we can't do it without you. So we need your support. So do me a favor. Go ahead and follow the join link in the description to this video and become a member today. As I have often told you, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. Don't be part of the problem. Become a member today. Also, and by the way, if you're already a member, even if you're not a member, all right, now is the time for you to go to FPC Gear. Folks, this is the place where you can go to get all of your Pro 2A swag. We're talking t-shirts, we're talking tank tops, we're talking hoodies, we're talking other miscellaneous stuff that is out there so that you can, so that you can be, you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. Folks, the place to go is fpcgear.com. Make sure to check it out. All right, let's get into today's topic. One of the very, very cool things about Bruen, the decision that came out was New York Pistol against Bruen. But one of the great things about that particular decision is it laid out a new way in which the courts are supposed to be looking at Second Amendment issues. And one of the most popular ways in which the anti-gun community is seeking to infringe upon our rights is, well, trying to ban certain firearms. You know, mostly those big, black, scary guns that they like to refer to as assault weapons. Now, you and I both know there's no such thing as an assault weapon, but hey, they do it anyway. One of the places that is probably most infamous, or one of the jurisdictions out there, is obviously New York, and they have their assault weapons ban. Well, today we're going to be talking about FPC's suit that was filed challenging New York's assault weapon ban. As we all know, it is unconstitutional because, well, one only needs to take a look at it compared to the new standard that is put in place. But what I would like to do is kind of talk about it in some detail with Mr. Bill Sack, Associate Counsel for the Firearms Policy Coalition. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, Craig. How are you?
How are we doing today, my friend?
Excellent. Very, very good. It's about 1,000 degrees here in Philadelphia today.
Well, we're dealing with about the same here in California, except I don't know that we have the humidity that you might have there in Philadelphia. Is it humid at all in Philly?
It's like a wet towel. It's horrible.
Oh, okay. Well, no wonder Philly sports fans are always so angry.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons.
That's one of the reasons. All right, do me a favor. Tell us a little bit about this particular lawsuit.
Yeah, so the case was just recently filed. The case was filed back on the 12th of July. And we filed in the Eastern District of New York. So it's in federal court in Eastern New York. And we are challenging the assault weapons ban in New York State. So this has been a long time coming. You know, as you mentioned in the intro, the fact that we've got a new standard now means that all bets are off in terms of the constitutionality of these assault weapons bans. You know, multiple circuits upheld these bans under the old test, but we know that the old test was the wrong test. And now that the court has clarified the proper test, being that we look at the text of the Second Amendment as informed by the history and tradition of its application, and how it was understood at the time of the ratification, uh, we know that there just simply is no historical analog for these sorts of feature based and particular uh, specific guns being banned by name. There's no historical analog for these. So we're very confident that the courts are going to be in a much tougher situation if they're going to try to bend over backwards and squint really hard to try to find a way to uphold these under the current constitutional standard.
Oh, but Bill, come on now. Now, we all know that the founders could have had no idea that we would have these, big scary guns that would be available today. And clearly, had they known, they would have put restrictions on the ability to own them, right?
And the founders had absolutely no idea that free speech could be protected on the internet. And the founders had absolutely no idea that cell phone records could be protected by the Fourth Amendment. And the founders had absolutely no idea. I mean, that argument, it falls apart under the most basic critical thinking and logic skills. Um, the Second Amendment applies to arms in common use for lawful purposes. That's the proper test for knowing what arms are protected by the Second Amendment. Back at the time of the ratification, the arms that were protected were the muzzle loaders and the black powder rifles that were, in fact, the weapons of war at the time. And so to make the argument that the founders had no intention of protecting weapons of war is absolutely absurd.
Well, and I think you make a great point. They always make this argument about weapons of war, but I'm like, no, those are in fact protected. And first of all, there is no weapon that is not a weapon of war. There may be some firearms, some weapons that are preferable when one is on a battlefield, but all weapons are weapons of war.
Yeah, the weapons of war thing is silly. I was kind of there was implied air quotes around the weapons
Right.
of war thing because that's such a common talking point that it's become ridiculous. Let's also not forget that these weapons of war that are far too scary for the average citizen or the average law-abiding person or peaceable person to own. Uh, the same people that are very interested in taking the guns away from us seemingly don't have any problem with these weapons of war being in the hands of every law enforcement officer, including tens of thousands of federal agents. Why do they need weapons of war if they're here just to do domestic law enforcement?
Well, there's your point. The reason why they need them is because their unions largely have their union bosses have largely gotten them exempted from the very restrictions that they want to place on the average citizen. And I've seen it happen time and time again in various states, especially here in California. And I think the average rank and file law enforcement officer would agree with us, but then again, their union bosses don't necessarily. They're not as concerned about our right to keep and bear arms as probably once again more rank and file law enforcement officers are. So the one thing that they always come back on, this is where I thought the two step decision started to work was, and once again it's interest balancing, but they always come back and say, well, what are we supposed to do when it comes to protecting people from these scary guns? How do you respond to that?
Well, the old test, the two-step balancing test, required that the states have a important government interest, which they always just claimed was public safety, and certainly public safety is an important government interest. But then they had to show that there was a reasonable relation between the restriction that they wanted to put in place and the stated goal, being public interest. How is there any reasonable relation between banning common arms in the hands of law abiding, peaceable people? We fail to see that connection. But let's remember that the balancing of our rights versus what the government wants is no longer the proper analysis. That's not what the government needs to show anymore, and that's not what we need to respond to. All we need to look at is what was going on at the time of the ratification up through the early to mid 1800s to see if there was any historically analogous restriction on the types of firearms or firearms features that to which there can be any connection between that and current feature tests and banning certain firearms just by name or because they have adjustable stock or a threaded muzzle or any of the number of asinine things that these assault weapons bans seek to restrict for no apparent reason other than politicians find them scary and people that are uneducated in firearms generally don't know any better, and so they assume that, well, why does the average person need a threaded muzzle? It probably makes the gun kill better.
Well, no, you're 100%. It's based on ignorance, or rather misinformation, because as we all know, most of these politicians get their knowledge about firearms from their friends in Hollywood and the movies and the TV shows in particular that they watch. It always amazed me how, once again, how they would get away with taking actions on items that are not used in crimes, that are not used to harm people overwhelmingly. I mean, we talk about it, for example, the assault weapons ban. These are basically what we're talking about is center fire semi-automatic rifles with detachable magazines. And what's funny is rifles as a whole are used in less than 3% of all gun crimes, and these rifles are actually a subsection of that. I just always found that weird that they always tried to get away. They always tried to get away with that, and their colleagues in the legislature and their colleagues in the courts, in a large degree, always allowed them to get away with that. And I think some of that just has to do with a real an ignorance of firearms and firearms technology.
Well, yeah, I think that's right, Craig. And I think also, though, I think that that's very much purposeful and manufactured. So, taking a little bit of a longer arc of firearm regulation history here, let's remember that up through the 1990s and even the early 2000s, the major thrust of most gun control was about handguns, because handguns made up the vast majority of firearm homicides. Handguns make up the vast majority of firearms crime. Handguns make up the vast majority of firearms accidents, for that matter. But then the Heller decision came out in 2008 and said, well, yeah, handguns are the quintessential tool of self-defense, and handguns are expressly protected by the Second Amendment. So the gun control advocates said, crap. Supreme Court says handguns are no good, or that their handgun regulation is no good. So what's our alternative here? It's like, okay, well, instead of handguns being the problem, because handguns are concealable and they're the most often used in crime, but handguns are now protected, we're going to go after the rifles. It's the rifles really that are the problem. The rifles are bigger and they're scarier and they have a hand thing up here and the stock moves, and that's terrifying. And we need to get rid of these rifles now because they appear to be the low-hanging fruit that may not be expressly protected. So the tactics shift on a dime. So let's remember that it's very much purposeful and manufactured in terms of, now that rifles are the bad guys, even though statistically, and as we were talking before we started filming today, Craig, facts don't matter. My feelings matter. Obviously we have had a terrible trend of mass shootings in the country, right? Tragic and terrible. Hard stop. But from a statistical standpoint, the media frenzy that surrounds those, the political frenzy that surrounds those, tends to inflate our feelings about that issue. And what we tend to do is equate big feelings with big problems. And when people are confronted with the actual statistical reality of how many long guns are actually used in crime over the course of any given year, the statistics just don't pan out.
Well, and here's what I will. One of the ways in which I tend to respond to people in a lot of these cases is especially when they come and say, "Well, what should we do?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, I am I am neither a law enforcement nor public safety expert or advocate. I'm an advocate for for protecting our fundamental rights and our right to keep and bear arms. And what I know is this. Having said that, what I know is this: you will not make people safer by by increasing their likelihood that they are a defenseless victim. Right? You're not going to make
Well,
them any safer.
here's the thing, as gun rights advocates and as advocates for maximal human liberty here at FPC, what we like to remind folks is the fundamental inherent right to self-defense is it creates the policy, the acceptable policy floor. Okay, this is the minimum that you have to be guaranteed. So it does not purport to provide all of the answers, right? So we don't have all of the answers on how to solve all of the problems in society, but what we can tell you is that certain things are off limits when it comes to a policy standpoint. There are certain things you cannot do. And when you try to start infringing on those things that you cannot do, and you start to get too close to that line and you go over that line, lawsuit Pernigo Burr, and we push you right back.
And I think that is the point right there. And it's, that's why I always like to say I have a lot of, I got a lot of love, and I appreciate a number of the other Second Amendment advocacy groups or gun rights groups. But FPC is the Second Amendment, the liberty purists. And I like that FPC focuses on those things. They don't get caught up in the politics of gun rights. They focus on the policy, and they focus on the values, and I think that is what is vitally missing too often with some groups, where they get caught up in the politics of it, and the right versus the left, and no, it's either you support liberty or you don't, and and I get it. I'm involved in politics on other issues and stuff in other areas, but ultimately what it comes down to is standing up for our rights. And that's what I appreciate about what you and the other attorneys with FPC do for us there in the courts. Speaking of that, where can folks go to follow the work of the Firearms Policy Coalition legal team?
Great question. So to check out Firearms Policy Coalition generally, one would go to firearmspolicy.org. There you can donate, you can join, you can become a member, you can read all of our press releases, you can read in their entirety all of the legal work that we are filing on your behalf. To go directly to our legal team's tab and see the chronology of all of the active cases that we are involved in, go to fpclaw.org. And there you can see all of the active cases that we are involved in on the people's behalf. And we have links to the dockets, to all of the briefing. We are big on transparency. Everything that we do for you, the people, is right there on the website.
Fantastic, sir. Well, once again, thank you for all of the work that you do. Thank you for coming on the program, and we will look forward to having you back soon.
Thanks, Greg. Always good to be here.
All righty. Okay, folks. Well, hey, that's going to be it for this episode of Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing the program and encouraging your friends to do the same. Remember, this is a fight for our civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.